Hi, my name is Dan Slater, and I oversee culture of innovation for our digital innovation team at AWS. In our culture of innovation presentation, we talk about four interlocking elements that we believe enable our own innovation at Amazon and AWS. One of those four elements is organization, how we structure teams in order to optimize for innovation on behalf of our customers, a topic which we'll dig into more here today. I'm thrilled to be joined by Andy Troutman, Director of Software Development at AWS. Andy and his teams develop new tools and features and structure themselves in ways that they can effectively innovate and execute these tools at scale and at speed. Andy is perfectly positioned to share what we've learned and what works for us in terms of organizing for teams and innovation. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks everyone. As Dan said, my name is Andy Troutman. I'm here to talk to you about Twopizza teams, which is Amazon's approach to how we think about and build team structure to optimize for innovation. And so today I'm going to walk you through sort of some of the underpinnings of the Twopizza team model. We're going to look at Amazon's culture a little bit, and we're going to look at the cultural elements that we think play in strongly into our approach to building teams and organizations that are built to innovate. And then we'll also take a dive into our technical architecture. We're pretty strong believers that at Amazon you need both a strong technical underpinning and a culture to support sort of the model that we'll talk about today. And then we'll talk about some of the advantages, disadvantages, and challenges of our Twopizza team model and our organizational structure, what works and what we have to work against. And we'll also talk about the model at scale. So if you were to adopt a similar model in your own organization, how do you scale it out? How do you make it work when you have many, many of these Twopizza teams? So let's go ahead and get started. I'll kick off with just a quick quote from Jeff. So speed matters in business, plus a high-velocity decision-making environment is more fun too. I use this quote because I think it really kind of drives home what we're trying to achieve with our Twopizza team structure. We are really trying to optimize for speed, right? We're trying to optimize for the pace at which we deliver products and features to customers. And we also believe that sort of a dynamic, fast-moving environment is just more fun to work in, right? And so as we go through this, I'll of course come back to this theme, but when you think about Amazon and you think about what we're trying to do with a culture of innovation, it really is about rapid iterative development, right? Releasing features and features as quickly as we can, getting feedback from the customer. And no talk about Amazon would be complete without the customer, so let me mention them right up front. So as I said, the goal is to deliver solutions to customer problems, right? And so we want to do that as quickly as we possibly can. And as I said, our view of the product process at Amazon is small incremental feature delivery, so a very agile approach to the way we deliver features and functionality. We want to have a customer problem. We want to give it to a team. We want them to be obsessed over the customer. We want them to myopically think about the problem that they have, how the customer thinks about it, how they're going to solve it, how it's going to be delightful, and then we want them to ship features quickly, rapidly, and in small iterative successions. We want them to take what they learn from one release and apply it to the next, right? So we're very big believers in an iterative flywheel, right? So we want small features delivered at a consistent, rapid pace, guiding us and helping us innovate on behalf of the customer. We believe that is a better approach than sort of a long product lifecycle, long lead times. We want to do this in partnership with our customers by obsessing over them, giving them solutions, and collecting their feedback, right? So as we talk more and more about this culture of innovation, this theme will be coming back, sort of this iterative, fast life cycle. So if you haven't studied much about Amazon culture, the first place I would encourage anyone to go to is our leadership principles. The Amazon leadership principles are pretty easy to find. You can go to your favorite search engine, type in Amazon leadership principles, and you'll likely end up on a web page like you see in front of you right now. These really are the codification of Amazon's culture and our values and principles. And so anytime we talk about Amazon's culture, this is a great place to start. There's only 14 of them, and it's a really quick read, so definitely worth looking at. Today, we're going to talk about 3 in particular that I think are very influential when we think about this culture of innovation and our approach to team and organizational structure. The first, as I have already started to allude to, is customer obsession. So customer obsession, we want our leaders to work backwards from the customer need. As I said, we want to build teams around a customer problem, and we want the teams to think very deeply and holistically about that customer problem. And we want them to look to innovate on the customer's behalf, right? And the only way they do that is if they have a very well-contained problem space that they can work in, reason about, measure themselves against the customer experience and the customer expectations. So everything we do is from the perspective of what does the customer want, working backwards, trying to satisfy those needs. As I've also already alluded to, bias for action is a big component of how we think about building our teams, and it's absolutely what we're trying to optimize for. So we want to build products, features, and functionality that rapidly deliver value to customers, right? And so we want to remove barriers to that decision-making process as much as we can, right? So when we think about these teams, we do, as much as possible, think of them as an autonomous unit, right? When people ask me what Amazon's organizational structure looks like, I often say it's a federation of startups more than it is a single entity, right? We push a lot of decision-making down to the teams because we don't want a lot of communication overhead. We don't want a lot of top-down or decision by committee because it slows down the team's ability to deliver features and functionality for the customer. And so customer obsession, bias for action, absolutely essential when we talk about building teams. Finally, ownership. So as I was just saying, we want these teams to be end-to-end owners. We want them to own the entire experience from beginning to end. And for us, that means that a team is formed for the long term, right? The team is formed to solve a customer problem from initial inception all the way through to the final product delivery. And teams own that entire life cycle from beginning to end until the problem is completely solved, or the problem goes away, or there's a better solution that we replace the service or functionality with, right? And so we need owners to think long-term about the product space, not deliver something and then move on. So these are essential aspects of what it means to be an owner, a team within Amazon, right? We want customer obsession, we want a bias for action, we want teams to believe that an iterative fast model is better, and we need them to own the solution end to end. So hopefully that gives you a good underpinning of sort of Amazon's culture, and in particular, the cultural values that we think are so important to our approach to cultural innovation, right? Our approach to building products, services, and teams that optimize for innovative, delightful experiences for our customers. Before I dig too deeply into the technical, I want to very clearly define sort of how does a two-pizza team work? What are we actually saying when we talk about a two-pizza team? So as it's already been alluded to, a two-pizza team is a small autonomous unit that operates on a single customer problem or a customer space. And their job is really to own all of the decisions and product and delivery for the customer from initial definition all the way through to operations, maintenance, and the end life cycle of a product. So you're going to own it end to end. When I say small, what we're typically talking about, average team sizes at Amazon still range in the 6 to 8 person level. The name Two Pizza Team comes from a meeting where we were heavily debating how big does a service team need to be? What's the optimal size? And someone very cleverly said, the team should be no bigger than what you can feed with 2 pizzas. So that's a classic, ambiguous Amazonian answer to a question like that, right? If you put me to a bet, I could probably eat 2 pizzas on my own, but a healthier 2 pizza team is probably made up of 6 to 8 engineers. Sorry, not just engineers. Whatever the team needs to be composed of to solve the problem. So this is an important aspect of the 2 pizza team model. We want teams to be composed of the right balance of engineers, managers, product people, test and quality people, and that is left up to the team to decide what the composition of roles and people within the group is to be able to solve the problem. Some of the benefits of this 2 pizza team model. So as we've already talked about, single-threaded ownership is a huge aspect of this. We want the team to think of themselves as a miniature startup within the larger organization who's been given a problem space to optimize for. That means that, as I said, they own the composition of the team. They own how they measure themselves, both their business metrics, their KPIs, their key performance indicators, as well as how they operationally measure themselves, what they're going to deliver, their roadmap, the feature set, the functionality, and the product lifecycle over time. They really are going to holistically own every aspect of the problem space, right? They're going to deliver on that features. And that single thread ownership is important for many reasons. One is speed of business. If they are making all of the decisions and they're driving the agenda, there's less communication overhead. There's less consensus building and coordination that has to happen across the organization. And it also means that they're highly accountable because they are the CEO of their problem space. Accountability is high. They are expected to holistically own it. And so success or failure, it's up to them to take what the lessons they learn as they iteratively develop and figure out how to feed that back into the product, the next product iteration and innovation. This also means that there's a lower cost to experimentation and failure. So when you have a highly autonomous team that tightly controls both the technical and the business aspects, they are able to more easily take on risk in the form of experimentation, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this in detail when we get to service-oriented architectures and how this encourages experimentation. But because the team is a deep understander of the customer problem, and because they're delivering small incremental features and functionality, every little micro experiment is relatively low risk from the perspective of the overall feature set, the overall product. And we highly encourage teams to try new things, right? Try innovative ideas, get the feedback from the customer, figure out if it's something that's catching on and that's well received, or if it's something that's kind of lackluster. In either case, you've learned something that you can use to inform your business as you move forward, right? And so again, we really want to encourage all of these aspects within our teams, and we think this very decentralized decision-making kind of bottoms up on behalf of the customer is the right way to build those teams and those organizational structures. Now let's shift a little bit and talk about some of the technical underpinnings that I think support this organizational structure and this team model. So as I said at the top of the talk, I don't believe that you can have a successful organizational structure without a technical architecture that well supports it and encourages the same set of values, right? So what we're looking for when we build teams is the cultural values that I talked about: bias for action, customer obsession, end-to-end ownership. But we also need a technical solution stack that allows teams to support that organizational structure. And for Amazon, that ended up being a service-oriented architecture. So if we roll the hands of time back to the very early days of Amazon, when we were coming out of the dot-com era, we looked like many products of the early 90s. Large monolithic database that controlled the entire data model for the product, many teams, services, and products kind of hanging off that centralized database. What ended up happening as Amazon grew, as the complexity of what we offered to customers grew, the features and functionality grew, it became harder and harder to operate in sort of a centralized approach, right? The coordination across teams became prohibitively expensive. And there was one memorable moment where we tried to deliver a new feature, and we spent many months trying to identify all the teams that changes to the data model would impact, negotiating, planning, and still we ended up with an outage that we weren't very happy with. And we realized that we were drastically slowing the pace of innovation down for the customer. We were also causing customer pain because it became impossible for us to really truly identify all of the stakeholders that needed to be involved. And so that's when we decided to move to a service-oriented architecture. And that didn't happen overnight. We made the decision very quickly, but it took many years of iteratively pulling pieces of domain information out of the centralized data model and putting them into services. And along the way, we had to identify customer problems that these Twopizza teams could own and operate in perpetuity. Again, we build these teams for the long haul, so we want to make sure that they're given a problem space that makes sense. And so as we made that shift to microservices, a couple things happened. we identified a set of principles that ended up being incredibly valuable from the perspective of innovation and this culture of rapid delivery. The first thing we did was we mandated that any data access of customer data or non-customer data, anything that mattered to the experience, could only be accessed through programmatic interfaces, so APIs. So everything was put through a contract, an API, an application programming interface. And so all data and experiences were now mandated to be accessed through services. This established a very clear contract between what a service was offering and what you could expect from that service. And it also created isolation between the customers of that service and the underlying backend implementation details. And this ended up being incredibly valuable. So as we talked about before, this need to be able to compartmentalize problems and to give full ownership of a problem space to a team is incredibly important. And the technical architecture needs to be able to support that full ownership. Services are great for this because you establish a contract with your customer, and as long as you can uphold that contract, you have an incredible amount of flexibility to change the underlying implementation details in the back end. And indeed, if you look at some of our most mature services, some of our most successful web services, they've evolved drastically over time. So if you look at a service like S3, when we launched S3, we were offering up to 512 megabytes of storage on the internet, right? Now you look at S3, and it's virtually unlimited storage across the globe, anywhere you want. The API and feature set has grown drastically over time. And in order to accommodate the growth and the feature set of S3, the service has had to be re-architected and redesigned many, many times. Yet, we've been able to offer that same solid API contract for our customers. So customers haven't had to migrate to S3 version 2 or version 3. We've been able to maintain the contract and do a ton of innovation and investment on the back end. This allows us, again, to experiment. We can experiment with new things because we can maintain the contract and own the back end. Fewer dependencies is another big aspect of this because we push things into services. We depend only on that API contract, and there's, again, less coordination overhead across teams. We also believe that within Amazon, any service that you build has to be public by default. So everyone can call everyone else. All of our services are built with the mentality that they're going to be publicly available to our customers. This is huge because it allows us to highly leverage that ecosystem of services to build better experiences. This essentially gives one of these small Twopizza teams more resources to play with. In the same way it gives you, our customers of AWS, more resources. You don't have to solve basic problems like how to do queuing or how to durably store large binary data. You don't have to manage and maintain your own database systems. All of this is done on your behalf, and it's the same way internally. This is what allows those small Twopizza teams to achieve so much on behalf of their customer, because it's a highly leveraged ecosystem that they're using to get their job done. And that really lets them focus on what is differentiated about the work they're doing, right? So we always talk about we want these Twopizza teams to be doing differentiated work, differentiated from the customer perspective. So is it work that directly helps solve the customer problem they've been given and delight customers? If it isn't, ideally it's given away to another service or another team. This open ecosystem also encourages quality, right? So Amazon very famously, when we build these Twopizza teams, there is no separation between operations, QA, and the engineering team. That is all the same Twopizza team. Because the team owns it long term, and because the services that they build can be called and used by anyone, you don't get to pick your consumers. It really raises the bar on the operational quality and availability we expect out of services. It also helps us understand which services are succeeding in that sort of internal marketplace or ecosystem. We can actually look at and see which services are getting highly utilized by other teams within the company, as well as our customers if it's a AWS service. And we can use that to figure out which teams are doing a great job of delighting customers and solving real customer problems, and which teams probably need to step back and think about what they're doing and whether it's providing value, right? So services that shrink and languish over time, it's an indication to the team and to the organization that something needs to change. And so some of these are just like clear inherent values of a microservice and a web services architecture. You could have other architectures that support this model, but foundationally, you need something that can isolate concerns and that allows you to leverage and share solutions across different organizational space without the implementing team having to coordinate person to person with all of the different stakeholders, right? That API contract is sort of how we manage that. Okay, so hopefully you've gotten a sense of it at this point. We build these small, highly autonomous teams. We give them a problem, a customer-facing problem. We ask them to solve it through a process of iterative and rapid product development. We encourage the usage of web services as an underlying technology to isolate concerns, and we encourage the reuse of the ecosystem of services that we've already built at the company so that they can get to differentiated work as quickly as possible. Now let's talk about Twopizza teams at scale. So let's say you buy in on our model, you're enthusiastic, and you roll it out at your own company. What are some of the things and challenges that you're going to encounter or anticipate? The first two I'll talk about are challenges of scale, right? So vertical scale, meaning when a Twopizza team gets too big, so a 3-pizza team, 4-pizza team, 5-pizza team. And the other is horizontal scale. What happens when you have many of these Twopizza teams? So let's look at both of those and some of the approaches that Amazon takes. The problem of vertical scale, when you have a team that goes from 2 pizzas to 3 pizzas to 4 pizzas to 5 pizzas and starting to get bigger, what do we do about it? Well, we actively seek to mitosis that team. We think of it as a cell that needs to be split apart into smaller constituent pieces. And each of those pieces need to be able to survive and to solve a customer problem on their own. What we typically see when teams get larger and larger and larger is a couple things are happening. One is the communication cost is getting higher and higher. The more people on the team, the harder it is to coordinate across the team and to keep everyone informed about what the goals are, what everyone's building, what everyone's focused on. You'll oftentimes run many projects in parallel on a very large team, and thus there's a communication cost across all of those different projects if they're contributing to the same code base. The other problem is that large teams, in terms of resources, often reflect large technical complexity. So you typically hire a larger team because they have accreted new use cases and new problem spaces over time, right? So they're getting bigger because they're taking on more for the customers. They're no longer solving the problem that they were perhaps set out to originally solve, but they've now taken on new features and functionality or new problem spaces because they've been successful. That's not a problem. The problem is that as those teams get more technically complex, it's harder and harder for any individual engineer to hold it all in their head, right? So very large, very complicated tech spaces, what you'll begin to see is subject matter experts and domain expertise within a team. So they have implicitly started to compartmentalize back into manageable sized units. Those are both really clear signs that what you need to do is you need to intentionally split back up the team so that you can preserve that agility, that speed, and that culture of innovation. When we typically split up a team, we go through a very similar process that we do when we found a team. We ask the teams to think about the problems that they're solving, and we ask them to work backwards from the customer and identify what it would look like if they focus solely on that problem space. This is another advantage of web services because as long as we maintain that API interface for customers, the backend details can be decomposed, can be split up, and can be reorganized very flexibly, right? So this gives us a clear advantage when we talk about building services for customers. It's very easy to maintain the API contract and to split up the backend details so that we can decompartmentalize a large team back into small Twopizza teams. Horizontal scale. So you're bought in on our Twopizza team model and you implement it and you achieve success. You delight your customers by delivering things rapidly and they're asking for more. So you keep spinning up more and more Twopizza teams. How does Amazon deal with all of these Twopizza teams that are by definition highly autonomous and highly motivated to solve their own problems? Well, it's not a completely flat organizational structure. It's not a holacracy. We still believe in an organizational structure. And what we seek to do with more senior levels of leadership, senior managers, directorships, vice presidents, is we create portfolios of teams that are interrelated, right? So if we go and take a look at EC2 for an example, EC2 is a very large API set, and there are many Twopizza teams under the umbrella of the EC2 API. We seek to co-locate teams that have common interests. And the more senior levels of leadership act in many ways as a sponsor for that domain. I like to use the analogy of a venture capitalist, right? A venture capitalist is there to ensure the success of their investments, right? And that means that they're doing a lot of coaching, mentoring, connecting to opportunities. They're there to advise. And if things get really chaotic and off the rails, they're there to step in and help out in a more hands-on fashion. But for the most part, they're letting the investment team that they've built own and operate those services. And that's sort of the role of senior management and higher levels of management within Amazon. We seek to empower more senior leadership to help teams to take a broader viewpoint of the portfolio and connect teams with other groups that might be solving similar problems, or groups that may be able to help accelerate the Twopizza team. And so we find that, despite the fact that we put so much decision making down at the leaf nodes, a hierarchical or organizational structure still makes sense for us, and it still allows us to achieve quite a bit. It also allows us to co-locate. So if we took EC2 again as an example, a good example might be we may have teams that are very focused on the footprint and size of the virtual machines that we run. They may be co-located with the launch team, the team that's actually responsible for launching those virtual machines. They have different customer problem spaces, but they have similar goals in mind, which is they want a lean, mean, and rapid launch time for instance launches for our customers. And so it makes sense to put them under senior leadership that's co-located so they can take advantage of each other's investments in technology while still maintaining that autonomy. One last concern that is often brought up when we talk about our model at scale is the concern of overlapping solutions, right? So what happens when, don't you get a bunch of teams that build the same thing again and again? How do you deduplicate technical investments? How do you make sure that teams don't solve the same problem twice? The answer is that in the short end, we don't actually focus on it very much, and we allow teams to experiment and to try things, even if it looks like the solution may be similar to something we already have. You'll hear oftentimes at Amazon the sentiment that 2 is better than none. It's better to have 2 solutions for something than it is to have no solutions for something. The other aspect of allowing teams to experiment, even when it's potentially duplicative work, is that we often discover that when teams innovate and make an investment, they find a new optimized way of solving the problem. Many problems look the same on the outside, and when you get into the details of what the customer problem is, the solutions can diverge very rapidly. You can also end up in a place where you have a local maxima, where you've solved a problem well, but you haven't solved it maximally. And allowing teams to experiment and to try new things helps us push our innovation beyond where it is today. So we're actually very big believers in the short term and letting teams experiment, try new things, and potentially duplicate solutions. Because we're taking a long-term view for our business, we believe that over the long haul, we can deduplicate places where it doesn't make sense. And we have a track record of being able to close off investments when it's very clear that they're the same thing. But it's absolutely essential to our culture and our way of thinking that we let innovation happen duplicatively in the short term. All right, so wrapping up, some of the key takeaways. Twopizza teams absolutely emerge from our cultural values, our desire to move quickly for the customer and to delight them with iterative, rapid development. We believe that a service-oriented architecture complements and is indeed essential to our team and organizational approach to innovating. It enables both of these things combined, enable high velocity decision making at scale. And we use our investments in these teams to drive innovation, which we believe drives customer value. So hopefully that's interesting and useful to you. Thank you again for the time today, and I'll hand it back over to Dan.
That was fantastic, Andy. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this presentation about Twopizza teams and learn more about how we organize for innovation. We have many more presentations in our innovation track that you also might be interested in, from deeper dives into our mechanisms, how businesses across Amazon leverage the breadth and depth of AWS's services and technology, how we're innovating for customers in the public sector, and much, much more. Feel free to dive in and enjoy. Thank you.